So Jai Bhim and Namo Buddhaya to you all. Today we will be entering into our 10th, sixth lesson, and it's going to be a little bit exhaustive in the sense of a lot of concepts which will take some time for anyone to understand or grasp, because this is the Buddhist philosophy at its best, and we are going to see the glimpse of that. So kindly pay your attention. I'm going to share my PPT. Share. 1 minute. Okay. So this is, wait 1 minute. Are these new features? Okay. So let's begin. So today we are going to study what is called the Buddhist Epistemology. Epistemology is one of the 5 branches of philosophy according to the Greek philosophical tradition, which means theory of knowledge as to how do we know something. So this is what we are going to look at in this sixth session. How do we know? And we are going to study Dignāga, Dharmakīrti, perception, influence, and a very important philosophical contribution of the Buddhist called Apoha. So this is going to be our sixth lecture. And wait, okay, sorry for this clumsy start. So this is what we are going to study: Dignāga, Dharmakīrti, perception, inference, and Apoha. In short, how do we know something? That's what is going to be the topic of our lesson today. So if I ask you to state briefly, what do you see? So, if we look at the image here, that different people will interpret different things depending on how do they perceive. So the underlying teaching here is this, that, whatever we see, we add our own conditioning to that. So, some of you might see, a person sitting here. Some of you might see, a very threatening gesture, something like that. So what did you see? If we ask, the first exercise is not about eyesight, it's about interpretation. So the eye received something, the mind completed it. So some of you might see a person, some of you might see a face, some of you might feel threatened, some of you might feel rope, some of you will say that nothing is clear what is there in this particular image. So you see, whenever we received something through our eyes, maybe perhaps we see the same thing, but each one of us, complete it or perceives it or interpret it depending on our own, conditioning. So this is what I wanted to bring in. So you see, this is something that we have to bear in mind. Like sometimes we see a snake, but actually it's a rope. And we all get, like, we even whenever we are traveling during hot day, we might perceive mirage, and we might think that it's water. So eyes receive something and the mind completed it. Please bear this in mind. So what happens is generally we see more than what is there always. And this is the entry point into Buddhist epistemology, the distance between appearance and belief. So as we move on with the class, we are going to, see more deeply. So this is true about our perception. What we always see is more than what is there, and our perceptions are like that. So our mind, as it were, creates the reality. Our mind, as it were, participate actively in the creation of the world that we perceive. And this is what is now brought up by the neuroscience as well, that our mind creates the reality that we perceive as the world. So the first distinction that we have to bear in mind whenever we look at the Buddhist epistemology or theory of knowledge or how we perceive something begins by separating layers of cognition. So what appeared and what we believed is not same. This, if you look at our own lives, we can clearly see that what appears is not what we believe. So between what appeared and what we believe, there are always memory, language, inference, fear, desire, and social training. I think we can all identify with that. So we have to begin with separating the layers of cognition. So whatever appears is not what we always believe. And there is this a gap between what appears and what we believe, which is mediated by memory, language, inference, fear, desire, and social training. So this is a very important thing to bear in mind. Then the epistemological question. This is a very important question. After emptiness, knowledge becomes more urgent, not less urgent. So in the previous lesson, we saw that nothing has the inherent existence. It's empty of inherent existence, sabhava shunyata. However hard we try to pinpoint to something which never changes, we cannot. So we see that things arise depending on the causes and condition, and things pass away depending on the causes and condition. So after emptiness, this question becomes the question of knowledge becomes very urgent, not less urgent. How does a recognition becomes knowledge? So whatever we perceive, whatever we recognize, how that becomes knowledge. If things have no fixed essence, we must examine the processes through which they are known, named, inferenced, and acted upon. So this is, I think, is very important. I'm going to read it again. If things have no fixed essence, and we have seen that according to Buddhist philosophy, that nothing has a fixed essence, svabhava shunyata, and therefore we must examine the processes. It's very important for us to examine the processes through which they are known, named, inferenced, and acted upon. So of course, we know the things, we name them, we infer something from them, and we act upon what we perceive, though there is no fixed essence. So it's very important. It's not less urgent, it's more urgent to know, to examine the processes through which they are known, named, inferenced, inferred, and acted upon. So error is not merely intellectual. So whenever we cognize something, the error is not merely intellectual, it's very deep down. A mistaken cognition can reorganize the whole world, whole person. So if we misperceive something, it reorganizes our entire being, isn't it? If we take something as a fixed belief, it reorganizes our entire belief, entire personality. And therefore, it's very important to know that, error is not merely intellectual. It sometimes the error makes us fear, it creates hatred in us, it creates craving in us, it creates prejudices, it creates false confidence, it might lead to violent action. So the Buddha's path is also training in not being deceived by the mind. So there is a very beautiful sutta about magic of mind. There is a book also written by a very famous Sri Lankan Buddhist monk and philosopher, The Magic of Mind, where he takes one Buddhist sutta and he tells that how the mind creates the world like a magic. That doesn't mean that we deny the reality of the world. We don't. We see that the world appears according to the causes and condition. But whatever we see, we cannot take it as at a face value, because the error in perception is not merely intellectual. It's a mistaken cognition which can reorganize the whole of our being. So uh, wait. So you see, so we have to understand that the Buddha's path is also training in not being deceived by the mind. So this is a very important part of the Buddhist training, that we should not be deceived by mind, because according to the Buddhist sutta, sometimes or all the time our mind creates the magic. Whatever we see, is always mediated by our senses. Whatever we hear is always mediated by our ear. We cannot know anything out there unless it is mediated by our senses and our consciousness. And we know that whatever we see is not what there is. It is mediated by our senses. So today I was taking a walk, and we were talking about the green leaves. So the green is the only color that is not absorbed by the leaves, and it reflects the green color. That's why we see the green color. So actually the green color is not inside the leaves, it's a reflected, and rest of the colors are absorbed. So like that, we can see that we have to train ourselves as to how we will not get deceived by the mind. So from misperception to suffering, we all know that one small distortion can become a whole world of reaction. So the misperception leads to suffering. That's why Buddha says ignorance is the cause of suffering, because we don't know what it is. We believe our senses, thinking that whatever they inform us is the ultimate reality. And we are going to see in the lesson number 7 as to how that misperception takes place on the level of mind. So that's for the lesson number 7. But today we have to bear in mind that appearance, the things appear to us, we interpret them. Then based on our interpretation, we either like them or dislike them. Emotions we grasp, then because we grasp something, we act upon it, and it leads to suffering. So the chain can be interrupted only if we learn where error enters. So this is a very important lesson for us to understand, that we have to find out where the error enters. So so far, what we have done is, in the previous lectures, particularly lesson number 3, 2, 3, 4, 5, we have examined, what is known, that we have examined the person as a nama rupa. Then we examined our nature of being, that is craving, the mind grasping on to everything. Then we, in the fourth lecture lesson, we saw causation, dependent origination, and in the previous one, the last one, we looked at emptiness. So earlier lessons examined what is known. The lesson examines how knowing happens. So today we are going to examine the knowing itself, as to how we know something. So every previous topic was received through cognition. Now cognition itself becomes the object of inquiry. So far we were looking at the cognition, but now the cognition itself is becoming the object of inquiry. And I think this is very interesting to bear in mind, that now we are examining how we perceive something, how we know something. So now we are examining the instrument itself, as to how we know the person, how we know the craving, how we know the causation, how we know the emptiness. So we are going to examine the very process of knowing. So every previous topic was received to cognition. Whatever we understood through last 5 lectures, it was through our cognition. But now cognition itself become the object of inquiry. So wrong view. Wrong view is not simply a wrong sentence. It is a distorted way of organizing experience. I think this is what we have to bear in mind. This is not about the language. This is not about the wrong sentence, though we know that the language can mislead us many times. So wrong view is not simply a wrong sentence. It's a distorted way of organizing experience. So this is how we organize the experiences, in a distorted way. That's a wrong view. That's a michhaditti. So the Buddhists have examined it very deeply, and they have come up with a term called praman. What should we take it as the valid cognition? So the reliable means or event of knowing, it's called praman. And there are many books on it which you can read, and I'm going to give you some readings as well if you are interested. So the praman is not merely proof, it's a cognition or process through which something previously unknown is known reliably. So it's not just a proof of something, it's a cognition or a process through which something previously unknown is known reliably. So what are the reliable means by which we can know something as a valid cognition? So the Buddhists have, uh, previously unknown, something is unknown, then cognitive access and reliable result. So this is what is the, how the Praman takes place. But I'm going to go deep into this. So knowledge of, I don't know why people are joining this late. So, the knowledge event, knowing is not a floating idea. It's a structured event. So whatever we know, it is not a floating idea. It doesn't happen randomly. It's a structured event. We know something through a kind of a structured process. So knower means of cognition object, and we know that how we perceive or cognize that leads to the action that we undertake. So the Buddhist inquiry asks which part of this event is reliable and where can error enter. Okay. So, what is our means of cognition? How do we perceive something as a valid thing? So this is a very, very interesting sort of philosophical inquiry that the Buddhists have launched. And so we have to bear in mind that knowing is not a floating idea, it's a structured event. So knower means of cognition and object. So I'm going to go deep into this a little bit so that these slides will be clear to you. So how do we distinguish this? How do we distinguish, the cognitive process itself? So the mind has many cognitive modes, not all knowledge. So we see something, we remember, we imagine, we doubt, we assume, we know. So these are various different modes by which our cognition is layered, like seeing, remembering, imagining, doubting, assuming, knowing. So a mature mind learns to label its own cognition honestly. So you see, the Buddhists have, categorized the various states of mind. They have gone into such a depth analysis of the process of perception that they have actually named various processes. And they happen so fast with such a speed. It's very difficult to pin down the processes. And I think that is one of the brilliance of the Buddhist philosophers, that they have been actually able to, explain as the underlying process of cognition. So of course, we all experience, we all see, we hear, we feel, we touch, we smell, we remember a lot of things, but 90% of the time we forget, we don't remember what happened yesterday, what we wore yesterday. If our brain has not forgotten, we wouldn't be here. So forgetting is as important as remembering, but we remember a lot of bits here and there, but we cannot fully remember everything. Even sometimes, we cannot recall, you imagine the face of somebody which are very close to us. So imaging, we imagine a lot of times, we doubt, we assume, we know. So process of knowing, a mature mind learns to label its own cognition honestly. So that's a very difficult task for us. And of course, there are Buddhist methods by which we try to understand our mental process. We try to understand our mental states, and we see how one leads to another. But that's for the other, sessions or other, courses. We are looking at the Buddhist philosophical aspect. So the Buddhist reduction, Dignāga and Dharmakīrti focus the analysis on two fundamental means. So there are two ways by which we know something. We know them directly, pratyaksha. So it is called pratyaksha praman, perception, and then inference. We try to inference, anuman. So there are two valid modes of cognition. And in the rival philosophies, they have shabda praman. So for example, if we look at the Brahminical philosophy, they also look at the words as the praman. but we Buddhists don't look at the words as a praman, shabda praman. So for the Brahminical philosophers, the shabdas or the words of the Vedas are the valid means of cognition. But that cannot be proved. But Buddhists have these two fundamental means: the perception, whatever we perceive, and inference. Based on our perceptions, we infer, anuman. So other forms of knowledge must ultimately depend on direct encounter, inferential relation, or combination of both. So, we have the perception, we have inference, and we have the combination of both. So these are the two mode of, valid cognitions that the Buddhists recognize. These things will become very clear to you as we move on, when we see the lesson in entirety. So this is the master map. Two pathways from encounter to responsible cognition. We direct encounter, we see the word as it is, perception, and science and relation through inference. Okay, and these two mode of valid cognition leads to what we can say responsible cognition. So there are some exercises that we might undertake today, like we observe colors without interfering, just have the direct perception, pratyaksha praman. And so this is the direct encounter, perception, and science and relation through which we draw inferences. So let's look at Dignāga. He's one of the greatest philosopher in the Buddhist tradition. So discipline of examining how a claim becomes justified. So Dignāga reorganizes Indian Buddhist thought around the question of reliable cognition. The focus shift from merely holding doctrine to testing cognition. So we are not just testing the concepts, we are not just playing with the words, but we are looking at our own cognition and how it can lead to error. So, this is a very important shift from a doctrine to disciplined knowing. So we train ourselves in knowing through the valid cognition. And we know that, the Buddhists have recognized two valid cognition. One is direct perception and another is inference. And the third is combination of both. So two kinds of cognition. Two kinds of cognition that we can look is perception and inference work differently. So perception immediate. We see something immediate. Like you open your eyes, you perceive the world. You perceive the sky, trees, you hear the sounds, you feel the breeze on your body or the touch of cloth on your body. These perceptions are immediate. They are non-conceptual in the strict sense. We don't conceptualize sky when we look at it. We just see. They are particular and we encounter them directly. And inference is always mediated. It's conceptual. It can be generalized and we interpret it through a sign. Okay. So this is the difference between the two kinds of cognition. Perception is immediate. It's happening all the time. It's non-conceptual in the strict sense. It's particular and we encounter it directly. But inference is mediated. It's conceptual, it's generalized interpretation through sign. So two kinds of objects. Two objects of perception and the object of inference are not identical. So what we perceive through our eyes or through our senses and the object of inference are not identical. So, the direct object is particular, unique, immediate, and causal. Conceptual object is general, classed, and nameable. So, for example, when you look at a tree, we do not have this conceptual object as a tree. But when we examine a tree, say, for example, biologically, we create a nameable object that a tree, we generalize it. We don't, whenever we study a tree in biology, we don't study a particular tree, we study a generalized tree, we class it in a certain, group, we name it. So this is a conceptual object which, the object of inference and the object of direct perception is not same. They are not identical. The distinction protects Buddhist thought from treating concept as if they were eternal substance inside things. So conceptual objects are, the objects which are not eternal substance. And most of the times we take conceptual objects as some kind of eternal substances. I think this is a very, very important thing that we have to bear in mind. So two modes of cognition, valid cognition, one is direct, pratyaksha, and one is anuman, inference. And the pratyaksha has as an object a particular thing, particularly unique, immediate, causal, and we draw inferences through the conceptual object, and they are generalized, they can be classed, they are nameable. So our direct perceptions, we cannot, just imagine our direct perception without the process of naming. So, just look at the sky without naming. Take away memories, take away your language. Just imagine, just witness something through your bare senses without bringing the conceptual mode of mind. We can do that. So this is a very important thing that we have to bear in mind, that there are two kinds of objects, and the object of perception and the object of inference are not identical. 1 minute. Okay, so let's look into it deeply. So you never simply see. No, I don't know how I admit people like that whenever they join at their convenience. I'm not going to admit them now. So you never simply see a tree. Ordinary experience is already organized by memory and naming. So you see, we see color, we see shape, we see contrast, we see movement, we see tree, we name it as name, we call it beautiful, and we identify it as mine. So whenever so we never simply see a tree or anything for that matter. So already, the ordinary experience is already organized by memory and naming. So we see a particular color, we see a shape, we see a contrast between this object and that object. We see movement, we see then, tree, we name it as Nim, we call it beautiful, and, we own it. We say, it's mine. So the eye encounters, the mind recognizes, language stabilizes. So very interesting. We are entering into a very deep level of philosophical, inquiry. So the eye encounters, the mind recognizes, and language stabilizes. And that's why, if I go to a forest, I will tell you that, I saw a tree. So I'm using a language to tell you that I saw a tree. But you will never know what kind of a tree I have seen directly. So you will imagine the tree that I have told you that I have seen a tree, based on your memory and even your conditioning, right? So this is very interesting. So seeing is not a saying. This is very beautiful. This we have to bear in mind. Or hearing is not it, cognizing.
सर इसको रिपीट करो. Seeing is not saying. इसको जरा एक्सप्लेन कीजिए प्लीज.
So you see something and you immediately name it, right? But you see something, you don't name it. You don't bring the process of cognition. You just witness it through your eyes, or you just hear something. You don't yet interpret it, right? So seeing and saying or naming are two different processes. So we encounter something, say for example, we were walking in the dark and we see something moving. We immediately, name it as a snake. But it might be something else. It might be a rope in the water. Okay. So this direct perception, as as I told you,
नहीं
okay, Mahendra ji.
नहीं नहीं, एक्चुअली जैसे हमने प्रिज्यूम किया स्नेक है, तो
हम्म
वो परसेप्शन है या इन्फ्रेंस है?
अभी उस पे आएंगे, उस
अच्छा
पे आएंगे, होल्ड ऑन. ओके. सो यू नेवर सिंपली सी अ ट्री. Ordinary experience is already organized by memory and naming, like this we have seen, and then we have seen that seeing is not it saying. A permanent memory set, you have to bear this in mind, because this is going to help us a lot, because a lot of our naming process is problematic. The reality is something else, but we run the show in our mind so much, creating such a story around it, that we lose the contact with the reality. So seeing is not it seeing. So bare encounter, can you remain with appearance before naming it? Now this is an image. If you look at it, just bear with it. Bare encounter of your senses. Can we remain with the appearance before naming it? Color, shape, texture. We just want to name something. We just want to grasp something with some kind of a stabilized, concept or a word, or any idea. So this is an image I placed before you. Can you just be aware of the color, shape, texture without naming it? What we always try to put a word to it. What is it? So direct perceptions are very powerful. So let's look at perception and construction. Strict perception is not same as ordinary recognition. Sensory appearance, recognition, name and class. So there are two kinds of perception. Direct perception, which we can say non-conceptual perception, so that conceptual addition can be examined rather than hidden. So there, before conceptualizations come into being, we have this direct way of perceiving the world. But the process of, conceptualization, which is called prapancha in traditional Pali language. Prapancha means, you know, creating the whole world out of something. So what Dignāga and Dharmakīrti ask us to do, they ask us to separate, isolate non-conceptual perception, so that conceptual addition can be examined rather than hidden. Okay, so there is a sensory appearance, there is a recognition, and then there is a name and class. Okay, we name them and we class them in certain categories. So the moment of contact, this is very, very interesting. So how do we experience something? We know that the light hits our eyes. We have this, visual image form, and we recognize. And if you look at the way the whole visual perception takes place through our eyes, it's very interesting. There is an entire biology of seeing. And as I told you, we don't see anything as it is unless it is mediated by our senses. So the world is mediated by our senses. Whatever we perceive is always mediated by our senses. So this is how the process of seeing takes place. Light hits eyes, then visual cognition, then we cognize and recognize, and then we name it. This is flower. Right? So, this is the process that we have to bear in mind, that light enters your eye, you cognize something visually, then we recognize it. All perceptual processes are very beautifully laid down in the Buddhist psychology. Okay, which we are going to look into a little bit details in the upcoming session. So we visually cognize something, then we recognize and we name it. So for example, if we are out in the open, we see a bird, we visually cognize, then we recognize it as a crow, we name it, it's a crow. Right? So this is a process. So this is a contemplative exercise. Just you notice any color, notice shape, notice texture. Was the mind searching? Notice relief when classification occurs. The process of naming, the process of conceptualization is taking place all the time. But can we slow down and we contemplate on anything before your field of cognition, whatever there is. Can we notice the color? Can we notice the shape? Can we notice the texture? Watch the mind searching forward. And then we cognize it as, oh, this is what it is.
सर ये नई चीज के लिए तो हो सकता है, एग्जिस्टिंग चीजों के लिए कैसे हुए? तो हम तो ऑलरेडी दिमाग बोल देगा ये है, कुछ भी देखेंगे
हाँ,
तो।
तो इसलिए जो है महेंद्र जी, इसलिए अपने माइंड को जो ऐसे ट्रेन करना है कि डायरेक्ट परसेप्शन के साथ रहे, इवन इफ द थिंग्स आर फैमिलियर टू यू, बट वी दे आर ऑलवेज न्यू टू अस. For the eye, for our senses, they are always new. But because this process of recognition comes into play, we take them as a routine. But everything that we perceive is new. We always perceive the new things. Even if they seem old to us, the cup is always new to our perception. You understand what I'm saying? Right? We become so familiar with it
हाँ,
that
वी नीड टू बी मोर ऑब्जर्वेंट। हाँ,
we need to be more observant, but we have to, when we bring the mindfulness, when we slow down our process of perception, when we don't rush, right? We hold on the process of naming, which is very difficult, which is not easy because immediately we want to classify the word into me and not me, into like and dislike. Okay, this happens so fast because we have been conditioned for a long time. This is my home. But sometimes this has happened to me. I don't know, some of you might have experienced it. Even if we are with certain thing for a long period, sometimes you feel that you are looking at it for the first time.
रेयर होता है, यस, होता है, बहुत रेयर होता है ऐसा। हाँ।
Right? So but you got
Yes.
the point, right? You got this exercise that before you just name something, you notice the color, you notice the shape, you notice its texture, you watch the mind searching for what is it, and notice relief when classification occurs.
किसी का नाम भूल जाते हैं तब ऐसी पोजीशन आती
Right,
है।
right, 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 right,
Yes.
right, right, right. But you see how our mind cognize something. The point here is how we cognize, how we recognize, and how we name it. These are very important processes that that are taking place. Let's move ahead, and things will clear to you. So names are useful. They are also dangerous when mistaken for essence. So we are not denying the process of naming or conceptualization. We are saying that they are useful, but they can also be dangerous when mistaken for essence. Like one of such naming is the self, that we use the word I. I think the most used word in the world is I. In any language, the most used word is I. But when you try to find out what is I, we don't find out. Okay. So it's a shorthand to refer to us. But we, have this, we okay, for example, the lesson of naming. Like, my name could have been different. Your name, Mahendra, could have been different. It could have been something else. But we identify with the sound of that. If our parents would have named us differently, we would have responded to that name. Okay. So, this is very important to understand that the names are useful, but they can also be dangerous when mistaken for essence. So most of the times when we are in the argument, we are only, fixing everything in the words. For example, we don't look at the other person as dynamic person. We have fixed them already that they are like that. They will be like that, right? But the people change all the time. Their nature change sometimes or all the times. But we have fixed them in our minds that they are like that. Like, for example, in Annihilation of Caste, Baba Sahib says that caste is a label. Now, this is a very, very deep thing. So the labels have also values. Like if you say Pandit, people feel good. This is a Pandit hai. But this, some of the names you have given a very wrong value. So you see, the naming is itself problematic, right? So we have to bear in mind the name gives control, but it may conceal the immediacy of encounter. So it's okay to call this a cup, but I fix it as the cup as an object, but forget its reality that it's fragile, it can break, it's undergoing changes all the time, as we have seen. It doesn't have the inherent essence, as we have seen in the previous lesson. And I assume that, this cup is never going to break, hold on to it. But the reality of the cup is that someday it's going to break. So, what the Buddhists are trying to say that names are useful, but they can also be dangerous when mistaken for essence. And names are very important. Conceptualization is very important. That's how we survive in the world. But we take language as, the eternal, or, you know, uh, pointing out to something out there which never changes. Like, for example, a cup, if I hold on to cup without understanding the reality of the cup, that it's a relational reality. The cup comes into being depending on the causes and condition, its use, and so many things around it, that we have seen that the reality is relational. We cannot find anything of fundamental essence in anything. Swabhava shunyata. So the names are important. They give us control, but it may conceal the immediacy of encounter. So imagine, that's why Buddha says in the Bahya Sutta, in seeing only seeing, in seeing only, seeing, in hearing only hearing. So just imagine that you are hearing something without judging it. You are seeing something without interpreting it. But the interpretation always comes so fast that the moment we cognize something, we start to recognize it. We interpret it. So this is an example of inference, smoke on the hill. You cannot see the fire. Why do you believe it is there? Okay, so I think this will explain you, help you to understand what is the inference, or anumana. So there is a visible sign. We all know this is a very famous example in the Buddhist philosophy, that there is a visible sign, and there is a remembered relation, and there is a hidden conclusion. So, for example, we see a smoke coming from behind the hill, smoke on the hill. Why do we believe that there is a fire? We cannot see the fire. We only see the smoke, but we believe that there is a fire. So there is a visible sign of smoke, but we have a remembered relations, that we have always seen smoke with the fire. And we have seen that in the kitchen, in our houses we have seen, or in the villages when people, cook something, they burn something, the smoke comes. So we have this remembered relation, and then we conclude that there must be fire because there is smoke, though we don't see the fire. So inferential movement is like that. Inference moves from what is seen to what is not seen. Very interesting. And based on the inference now, it's akin to a scientific method. Nobody has seen the galaxies with their bare eyes, but through the inferential movement, we know that there are huge galaxies, there are stars bigger than the sun. So the inferential movement is like this. Inference moves from what is seen to what is not seen. We see the smoke, we have the remembered relation, and we conclude that there is a fire. So inference is not guessing. It's a disciplined movement through a sign. So this will be very clear. Three requirements of a good reason. Why do we believe something to be, a valid cognition? So there are three, reasons to believe something: present in the case, present in similar cases, absent where conclusion is absent. So these three all are called paksha, sapaksha, vipaksha. These are the three ways by which we understand. So I'm going to explain you present in the case. So for example, whenever there is a smoke, there was a fire that we have seen. And in the similar cases, we have seen that when the people cooked food at their houses, old times, they burned the wood, and there was a smoke, there was a fire, and absent where conclusion is absent. For example, in the lake, in the water, you don't see smoke or you don't see fire, right? It's absent where conclusion is absent. So there are three ways, paksha, sapaksha, and vipaksha. So third is a very important, because the fire cannot be present in the water, but the fire can be present where there is, people are cooking something, they are burning leaves, or whatever they are burning, there is a fuel, there is a fire, there is a smoke. So these are the very three important Sanskrit terminologies: paksha, sapaksha, vipaksha. So let's look at this. Like smoke and fire. Claim there is a fire on the hill. Reason because there is smoke. Okay. Example: where there is a smoke, there is smoke of this kind. There is fire, as it is in kitchen. The sign must be tested before the conclusion is trusted. So see, these are the processes. There are a lot of big books written on this. I am just simplifying this to you. Whet your appetite so that you can study it more deeply and on your way. Buddhist philosophy is very fascinating, very interesting. So this is the valid process of cognition: paksha, sapaksha, and vipaksha. And there are terminological things. There are courses around this Buddhist logic. There are books of the Buddhist logic. I'm just introducing you to something very preliminary or elementary, but it's not that elementary, as you can see. And I have already told you that don't just look at it for the first time. You go through it again and again, think about it. you know then we begin to understand the beauty and the importance of Buddhist philosophy. So claim there is fire on the hill. Reason because there is smoke. Example: wherever there is smoke of this kind, there is fire, as in a kitchen. The sign must be tested before the conclusion is trusted. So inference can fail. A sign does not interpret itself. Okay, so sometimes we have, our inference can fail because it doesn't satisfy the certain, inferential process. So mist can be mistaken for smoke. There might be mist. We might mistake it for smoke. A wet road taken as proof of rain. Silence taken as proof of agreement. A sign does not interpret itself. Okay, so it's our mind that interprets the sign. So let's look at this is very interesting example, the problem of the cow. What single essence is present in all cases? If we look at these various photos of images of cows, what is the single essence that is present in all the cases? So what is the cowness of it? There are cows of different colors. Some of them are hairy, some of them are thin. So what single essence is present in all the cases?
Kaunas.
Huh?
Kaunas.
Yes. So where is the cowness? What is the cowness here? Are the horns cows, or their particular shape cow? Because they all have different shapes. They all have different faces. So this is a very interesting, deep philosophical finding of the Buddhist. The word works across difference. The word, is not self-explanatory. It always works across difference. But does it reveal an eternal universal inside each animal? Can we say that there is some kind of a cowness in each of the cow? Then can it be separated from each of them? Is there a substance called cowness in the world? It's a very interesting question. So the word works across differences, but does it reveal an eternal universal inside each animal? So we see this from here. This is called the Apo philosophy. No universal co-object. Apo explains meaning without fixed essence. Apo means exclusion. A term functions by separating its field from what is excluded from him, meaning without eternal universe. There is no universal meaning. We construe the meaning depending on the exclusion. That will become clear with this slide. Meaning through exclusion. The term creates a workable boundary. So the cow is excluded from non-cows. So because it's not goat, it's not horse, it is not deer, it's not dog, it's not human being. Huh? It's not buffalo, it's not bird. So, how do you cognize, the cow by excluding non-cows? So Apua shows how language can function without discovering a permanent essence inside the object. This is very deep. This is called the philosophy of language. Even if you don't understand it now you just appreciate the beauty of, how the Buddhists have dissected our human mind, the philosophy of language so deeply that even the word cow doesn't communicate any essential universal called cowness. We use the word cow, we pursue the word cow through the exclusion of non-cow. So similar is the case for dog, because dog is not cow, not deer. So this is very deep in terms of understanding the philosophy of language. And these are very deep philosophies. As I told you that, if it can whet your appetite and make you go deeper in the study of Buddhist epistemology, that will be success. You cannot, you don't, think that you will be able to grasp this thing, in just one lesson. This is very deep. There are volumes and volumes written on these concepts. So the power and danger of classification: words allow thoughts. Words can also harden into false essence. So we think, we communicate, we reason. The words can, lead to domination. They can lead to exclusion. For example, the words like pure and impure. We know that these are just words. Superior and inferior. But you see how these words, when they are taken as, having essence, create such a big problem in the world. Insider and outsider, touchworthy and untouchable. So the political danger begins when a social classification is mistaken for natural essence. So these words are, dynamic words, dynamic terms. They change, but, they fix the meaning, and we cling on to the words without knowing that there is no, as we have seen, that there is no cowness. We pursue cow, we say cow by excluding non-cows. Okay. So, similar is the case with all the nomination in the world, all the labels that we use. So there is a power to the classification because it makes the knowledge work, but there is also danger if we cling on to the categories as if they indicate some kind of the sense. So let's look at this from the Ambedkarite perspective. Apua helps expose caste as constructed classification, not human essence. Okay, so long as there is a Brahman, there is a lower caste. You see, because they are, one is now the Buddhist philosopher didn't go much into this. Some of them have gone into that, but the labeling of the caste is a constructed classification. It doesn't refer to the human essence. And the Buddha has time and again taught this. The Buddhist philosopher have time and again, talked about this. So caste converts a social classification into an imagined essence. So it creates boundaries, it creates exclusion, the repetition, inherence, and status. This is contemporary philosophical application, not a claim that Dignāga himself wrote a theory of caste. But we can use this theory of labeling, exclusion and non-exclusion, how we create the linguistic categories, how we create the conceptual categories. There is nothing inherent in that. And, we can use it to understand the theory of caste as well. So, Dharmakirti, this is a very heavy lesson. I will request you to go through this lecture again and again. I have done it many times. It's very difficult to communicate as well. So, Dharmakirti enters. When should a cognition be trusted? Now, this is very important. When we understand that something is valid. So, we have seen when we perceive them directly, pratyaksha praman or inference, the inference can also be faulty if it is not following up the process. But Dharmakirti has given us a very interesting definition, and this comes very close to what is happening in the scientific domain these days. A cognition must not betray us. the question now becomes practical. How does cognition guide successful and appropriate engagement? This is very important. If something is true, it should work. And it should be, proved by the experiment. This is what Dharmakīrti is all about. He says that if something is valid, it should work. So, for example, the fire has a quality of burning, it will lead to burning. Okay. So, for example, the photos of bread, butter, they cannot satisfy our hunger. Only real bread and butter can satisfy our hunger. Okay, because it works. The photos of food doesn't work. So what he is saying, Dhammakirti, is when should a cognition be trusted? A cognition must not betray us. The question now becomes practical. Does the cognition guide successful and appropriate engagement? So non-deceptive cognition. Knowledge should not collapse when we act on it. So the action must lead to the expected result. This is how the experiment works. This is what is the scientific method, that we think about something, and then we construct the experiment. In an idealized situation, we experiment and we see that it leads to the expected result. So this Buddhist philosophy is not just speculative. It is not speculative at all. It asks us to test it. So deceptive cognition might not lead to the expected result, but the cognition, if it's valid cognition, if we act on it, it might lead to the expected result. A reliable cognition successfully directs us towards the object or purpose for which it functions. So knowledge and action, cognition becomes visible in its consequences. Valid cognition leads to appropriate action, expected result. Error, inappropriate action, frustration or suffering. So this is the ethical discipline of knowing. 5 questions before believing or acting. What was actually perceived? Okay, so this is the actual ethical discipline of knowing what was actually perceived, what was inferred from what we perceived, what was merely remembered, what has language added, what would show that I am mistaken. This is a very important training that we have to, epistemological training that we can undertake. We actually, look at what we are perceiving, what we infer from there, what anuman we have drawn from there, or what was merely remembered, what has language added, and what would show that I am mistaken. So this is a process that we have to, understand. We will have a small discussion because I know this is a very heavy topic. And I wanted to deal very heavy topics here in a very short span of time. We have, it takes lectures after lectures to, think about these things. But my goal is to enable you or whet your appetite, create interest in the Buddhist philosophy so that, you will yourself undertake these studies, read very deeply. I'm going to prescribe some books for you to read in the group. But you see, you appreciate the depth of the Buddhist philosophy. Okay, so wisdom begins when we stop confusing what appears, what we imagine, and what we know. So see carefully. This is our lesson today. Infer responsibly. Name provisionally. The names are always provisionals. They are instruments. They are plan of action. That's what Dewey would say. And act compassionately. So you see, this is a very, as we can see from this discussion today, that these are not easy topics to study. But once you begin to take interest in this topic, once you begin to dig deep into this, Buddhist philosophy, which is top class philosophy in the world, that the kind of philosophy that I was talking in the 5th lecture, the relational nature of the existence. A lot of, the scientists talk in those language nowadays. In fact, there is this great, astrophysicist he's a quantum physicist, Carlo Rovelli. In fact, he talked about this, about the reality as the relational reality having no essence, and he uses Buddhist example in that. This is not to say that Buddhism anticipated all that modern science has been, telling us. We cannot, make those claims. What we can see clearly is that the Buddhists have developed the methods to inquire deeply into the into the mind itself. And we do have the methods to look into our perceptual processes, to see how we cognize, to see the errors in our cognition, to pursue the way it is. And I think, through this lecture, you can see that how deep is the Buddhist philosophy of, the Buddhist epistemology as to how do we pursue something. This is the lesson where we are trying to look at the mode of cognition itself, as to how we cognize something, how we can fail to, cognize wrongly, or, we can succeed in cognizing as it is. So this is all, a matter of practice. And these lessons, I hope, will enable you to take the studies further. So I will stop here and let's discuss or whatever comments you have on this
तो
lecture.
सर एक बार स्लाइड नंबर 22 एक बार दिखाइए, आपका जो था ना।
आगे स्लाइड्स
22।
22 ना। एक मिनट। क्या हो गया?
ये लेफ्ट में दिख रही है ना स्लाइड्स 22।
हाँ दिख रही, लेकिन ये मेरे को ये क्या दिख रहा है?
ये कुछ और आ गया, लेफ्ट में है स्लाइड्स आपकी।
नहीं, लेकिन ये जा नहीं रहा ना, ये
हम्म।
जो है वो जा नहीं रहा है। ये क्या आ गया?
महेंद्र जी कंटेंट बता देंगे प्लीज, क्या है उसका?
वो मैं ना कुछ उसको पूरी तरह देख नहीं पाया, वो मैं नोट भी नहीं कर पाया।
हाँ अभी आ गया। हाँ ये देखो।
हाँ हाँ, ये क्या कह रहा है ये? हाँ, इसको थोड़ा एनलार्ज कीजिए। हाँ, स्ट्रिक्ट परसेप्शन इज नॉट द सेम एज ऑर्डिनरी रिकॉग्निशन।
यस।
ये थोड़ा सा।
सो अब अपना जो परसेप्शन है ना, उसमें अगर हमने डिसिप्लिन लाए कि हम लोग कैसे कोई चीज को परसीव करते हैं, ठीक है, तो
नहीं, व्हाट इज स्ट्रिक्ट परसेप्शन? परसेप्शन इज परसेप्शन।
नहीं 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 नहीं। Sometimes what happens, we do not see as it is. The process of seeing itself is already biased,
ओके
for many of us.
ओके, तो
And
हाँ,
हाँ, and strict परसेप्शन मतलब ऐसा है कि you directly perceive something.
कैजुअल परसेप्शन
कैजुअल परसेप्शन नहीं बोल सकते
या
उसको।
बायस परसेप्शन हो गया।
Many a times we even don't pay attention to the object. Okay. What,
हाँ,
what Buddha is getting at is, can we see when we see? Can we hear when we hear? Okay. Can we taste when we taste? जैसे हम लोग कोई खाना खा रहे हैं तो हम लोग, हमारा टेस्ट की तरफ ध्यान ही नहीं रहता है,
हाँ, ये है, ठीक है।
राइट?
ओके,
हम लोग क्या बोलते हैं, इसका मतलब ये।
तो मतलब वी ऑपरेट ऑलवेज इन ऑर्डिनरी रिकॉग्निशन,
यस
वी नेवर ऑपरेट फ्रॉम स्ट्रिक्ट परसेप्शन।
यस।
यस।
But this is a very important slide. There is a sensory appearance, then we recognize, we name and class it. ये फल है, ये फूल है कि नहीं? लेकिन फल और फूल को ही पता नहीं कि वो क्या है करके। डॉग को पता नहीं रहेगा कि उसको डॉग भी कहते हैं करके।
थैंक यू। आप हमें सजेस्ट कीजिए कोई सिंपल बुक्स पहले।
हाँ, लेकिन आप समझिए अभी कि मेरा पर्पस क्या है इसमें।
यस,
आई वांट यू ऑल टू अप्रिशिएट कि कितना
यस,
डीप है ये।
यस, वी बिकम मोर क्यूरियस अबाउट नोइंग फर्दर।
इट्स सो डीप, इट्स सो इंटरेस्टिंग।
थैंक यू। क्या बड़ा
And
अच्छा था आपका। एक्चुअली यू हैव मेड कॉम्प्लेक्स थिंग्स सो सिंपल।
नहीं नहीं, इट्स वेरी कॉम्प्लेक्स। आई
Yes,
डोंट।
yes, yes, yes. Even
very
then,
complex.
at least we could have a taste of that
Yes.
complexity in a
थोड़ा
very
सा
simple
टेस्ट,
manner.
थोड़ा टेस्ट भी मिल गया तो बहुत है।
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Umesh ji,
Thank you so much for introducing such a deep and profound topic to us. I'm really very thankful for it. और इससे आज का टेक अवे हम इस तरीके से ले सकते हैं, वी कैन टेक इट लाइक दिस, दैट बुद्धा इज नॉट ट्राइंग टू गिव अस अ न्यू बिलीफ सिस्टम. Means he is teaching us how to observe the mind, so that we can clearly observe the illusions and gradually uh, make it lose its power. Very profound, Dr. Saab. Thank you so much. And today's take, what I have taken is what actually is happening before my eyes, and what my mind is added to it. That's difference we have to make, I hope.
yes,
Is it so, sir?
yes, yes, yes. This is perfect.
We have to be less judgmental. You can-
It
we
takes
can,
time.
yeah.
Buddha is asking us to cultivate mithya sammaditthi. He is asking us to get rid of mithya ditti, wrong cognition. He wants us to cognize the way it is. And we cannot just do that. We need to, have a training. We need to know what is the valid process of cognition, isn't it? So I think there are these three things: direct perception. The second is inference, valid inference, not this thing. We don't believe in Shabda Praman. We believe in Pratyaksha Praman. We believe in inference. And as Dharmakīrti said, brought it, whether it works. Okay. So this is very important addition by Dharmakīrti, that whether it works. So whatever is rightly, is a valid thing will work. It can be
Is
validated
there
through
any
experiment.
is there any ways we should start adopting this and following this and practicing it? Means from where we should start at level 0, 1.
No, first is, I told you, there is a contemplative exercise also we have seen. If you go to the lecture, that, how we stay with our direct perception before we name something. This is a very important exercise. For example, breathing. Can we witness the breath as it is? Isn't it? Or, anything that, just when we see, just become mindful that we are seeing before we add, the process of naming and conceptualization. Can we just hear the sounds without, making them into concepts? Then there are a lot of things that how do we take for granted? Can we, validate them? And if something we think that it's valid, can it work in the reality? If we experiment with them, like for example, in the domain of science, if something is thought through, but then it's enacted in a lab and it tested. So the valid cognition, never fails the test of, the test when it is tested, right? So
So
even
I'm
if,
searching for the methodologies. I mean, just we drive, and our foot and mind and hands automatically means in resonance they work. Then how can we start seeing the things like these philosophies?
no, the first is, slow down, mindfulness, attention.
Okay,
Okay.
okay.
So there is an entire process, and we have been talking about that in several lectures. But this
Jai Bhim,
was,
brother.
yes, Satish.
So this was depth and Dhammakirti and Dignāga was systematic logical philosophers of Indian philosophy. I think I want to mention in Tamil literature there are five epic classics there. Brahmical influence are come from 7th century. Up to 6th century, the five epic classics speak on three Buddhism and two Jainism. It's full of Dignāga and Dhammakirti. You take Manimegalai, this full of logic is there. What is spoke is there. It's interpreted and given to common masses. That's the beauty.
Very good, very beautiful.
It's a up to 6th century. These two people revealed all the Brahminic, Vedic, and Jainic scriptures, and debates are going on. So whatever we think independently arising, we need to stop putting essence on that and cultivate our mind, see that properly, and get a right view. So whatever the Nagarjuna did on the objective side of the emptiness, these guys are did so much on Yogacara and give a subjective side, a philosophy and logics to what we happening, what we seeing this side. It's very, very beautiful, very depth. I've been taking for 2, 3 years to understand this thing,
Yes.
studying. And you take Dhammakirti, that Brahmana Vartika, last time we speak with in your room also. It's a wonderful text actually. I recommend people to go on through these things. It's almost reflect to what Baba Sahib did in English of caste, right? The 5 epics and the 5 debates are there. It's a beautiful thing. People, more and more people want to work on these things, even academically. They
Yes.
need to know people and get into the masses what we need for our liberation, something like. It's a very, very good lecture. I really appreciate that. So
Thank
much
you.
depth
Thank you.
in within a 1 hour. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. You see, I think what Satish has, brought into this thing, this philosophizing has taken place for centuries. And in the modern times, people have given the mathematical notations to these philosophies as well. There is a Russian writer, Shebarsky, he has written 2 books on Buddhist logic. And there is another philosopher, a logician, mathematical logician, Graham Priest, who has given mathematical notations to a lot of these things that we are talking today in terms of logic. And the Buddhist logic is beyond logic, in a sense. If you use the modern notations, it altogether opens up a different world. So I think Satish is very right. I think our community has
And
to move
on
on.
this basis only, I think NLP has been based on neuro-linguistic programming that Brandler and Grander has introduced to the world. It's totally on this philosophy only, sir.
But no, I think our people have to now dig deep into this world of knowledge. Anyway, so let's end our class today here, and thank you for joining. And if you don't understand something, go back to the lesson. I think we have to look at them again and again. So thank you so much. Jai Bhim, Namo Buddhaya. See you next week.